The crack of a single gunshot echoed through the Montana foothills as Hank Addison watched the life drain from his wife's eyes, her final breath taken not by outlaws or Indians, but by the relentless grip of tuberculosis that had plagued her for months. The year was 1872, and with Mary's passing, Hank was left alone to raise their twin 7-year-old boys on a struggling cattle ranch with winter fast approaching. "Pa," Daniel's small voice broke through the heavy silence of the cabin. "Is Ma with the angels now?" Hank turned from the bed where his wife lay, her once beautiful face now peaceful in death. His sons stood in the doorway, their faces streaked with tears. Daniel, the more outspoken of the twins, had asked the question, while David hung back, his thin shoulders trembling. "Yes, son. Your Ma's suffering is over now." Hank's voice cracked despite his best efforts. He'd fired the gun outside an old tradition to mark a passing, to alert neighbors miles away that death had visited, though he doubted anyone would hear it in this remote corner of Montana territory. The boys looked so much like Mary it nearly broke him. The same golden hair, the same clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through a person. They'd been robust children once, but the past months of their mother's illness had taken a toll. They'd grown thin and quiet, shadows of the boisterous boys they'd been. "What's going to happen now?" David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Hank crossed the room and knelt before his sons. "We're going to bury your Ma proper tomorrow, and then we're going to keep living just like she wanted us to." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. How could they possibly go on? The ranch was failing, the cattle thin, and winter would soon blanket the land in unforgiving snow. 3 days after burying Mary, Hank saddled his horse at dawn. He'd arranged for old Jim Peterson from the neighboring ranch to look in on the boys while he rode into town. Sweetwater wasn't much more than a dusty main street with a general store, saloon, and a handful of other businesses. But Hank needed supplies and perhaps a loan from the bank if Mr. Finch was feeling generous. "You watch after your brother, you hear?" Hank told Daniel as he mounted his horse. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, standing straighter, trying to look grown. The 12-mile ride into town gave Hank too much time to think. Mary had been the heart of their family. She'd kept the books for the ranch, taught the boys their letters, and somehow managed to make their rough-hewn cabin feel like a home. Without her, everything seemed pointless. Sweetwater was unusually busy when Hank arrived. A stagecoach had just pulled in, and people milled about the street. He tied his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, nodding to Mr. Wilson behind the counter. "Hank," Wilson greeted solemnly. "Heard about Mary, my condolences." "Thank you," Hank replied stiffly, handing over his list of supplies. "Need to put this on credit if you can spare it." Wilson frowned slightly but nodded. "For now. How are those boys of yours holding up?" "There," Hank started, but was interrupted when the door opened, letting in a shaft of bright sunlight and a woman he'd never seen before. She was tall and slender, dressed in a simple dark blue traveling dress, her auburn hair neatly pinned under a modest hat. What struck Hank most, however, were her eyes, deep brown and intelligent, taking in the store with a quick, assessing gaze. "Good afternoon," she said to Wilson. "I'm looking for Sheriff Taylor. I was told he might be here." "He was in earlier, miss," Wilson replied. "Might be over at the jail now. Thank you." She turned and for the first time seemed to notice Hank. Something in her expression changed slightly, a flicker of recognition though they'd never met. "Excuse me." As she left, Wilson let out a low whistle. "That's the new school teacher, Miss Delia Forrester, came in on today's stage." Town council finally convinced the territorial government we needed a proper school. Hank barely registered Wilson's words. A schoolteacher was of no use to him or his boys out at their remote ranch. What he needed was rain for his pastures, better prices for beef, and perhaps a miracle to keep his land from being swallowed by Emmett Caldwell, the wealthiest rancher in the territory who'd been eyeing Hank's water rights for years. The bank proved as unhelpful as Hank had feared. Mr. Finch, with his pinched face and cold eyes, reminded Hank that he was already behind on his loan payments. "What you need, Mr. Addison," Finch said, "is to consider Mr. Caldwell's offer. He's willing to take the property off your hands for a fair price." "Fair," Hank scoffed. "It's worth 3 times what he's offering, and you know it." "Worth is relative to what a man can do with the land," Finch replied smoothly. "And a widower with 2 young children might find it difficult to run a cattle operation alone." Hank left the bank with a simmering rage in his chest. By the time he'd loaded his meager supplies, the sun was low in the sky. He should stay in town, get a fresh start in the morning, but the thought of his boys alone with only old Jim checking in drove him to mount up and begin the long ride home. The attack came without warning. One minute Hank was riding through a narrow pass, and the next, his horse reared as gunfire split the air. Pain exploded in his shoulder, and he tumbled from the saddle. The last thing he remembered was seeing 3 masked figures approaching as darkness claimed him. Dawn brought consciousness and agony. Hank found himself lying in a shallow ravine, his horse gone, his supplies stolen, and a bullet hole through his left shoulder. He managed to tear a strip from his shirt and bind the wound as best he could before beginning the long, tortured walk home. By the time he staggered onto his property, the sun was setting once more. His vision swam, and fever burned through him like wildfire. He could see the cabin, lamplight in the windows, when his legs finally gave out and he collapsed. Delia Forrester had not planned to venture so far from town on her first day in Sweetwater, but Sheriff Taylor had been insistent. "The Addison boys need to be in school, Miss Forrester," he told her. "Their ma just passed, and Hank's likely to keep them working that failing ranch rather than see to their education. Thought you might want to pay a visit, convince him otherwise." So she'd borrowed a horse and directions and set out that afternoon. What she found at the Addison ranch was not what she'd expected. The cabin was modest but solid, though in need of repair. 2 identical boys with solemn faces greeted her warily from the porch, while an elderly man dozed in a chair nearby. "I'm Miss Forrester, the new schoolteacher," she'd introduced herself. "Is your father home?" "Pa rode to town this morning," one of the twins had answered. "He ain't back yet." Something in the boy's voice, fear poorly disguised as bravery, had touched Delia's heart. She dismounted and approached the porch. "Well then, perhaps I could wait a while. I'd like to speak with him about your education." That had been hours ago. Now, as dusk settled over the land, Delia found herself increasingly concerned. The old man, Jim Peterson, had left after assuring her Hank would return soon, leaving her alone with the twins. "Your pa is probably just delayed," she told them as she helped prepare a simple supper from the sparse contents of the kitchen. "These things happen." She learned their names, Daniel and David, and that they could read a little, thanks to their mother's teaching. She learned too of the hardship they'd faced, the drought that had decimated the herd, their mother's long illness, and the neighboring rancher who wanted their land. "Pa says Mr. Caldwell won't ever get our water rights," Daniel declared fiercely as he set the table. It was David, the quieter twin, who first noticed the figure stumbling toward the cabin. "Pa!" he cried, running for the door. Delia followed the boys outside just in time to see Hank Addison collapse in the dirt yard. His shirt was soaked with blood, his face gray beneath his tan. "Boys, heat water and bring clean cloths," she ordered, kneeling beside the unconscious man. "Quickly now." Together, they managed to get Hank into the cabin and onto his bed. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder, which was both blessing and curse. No need to dig out lead, but the risk of infection was high. Delia cleaned and bandaged the wound as best she could, drawing on knowledge gained from helping her father, a doctor, during the war. Through the night, she tended to Hank, battling his fever with cool compresses and spoonfuls of water. The twins hovered anxiously, refusing to sleep despite her gentle urging. "He's all we got now," Daniel explained simply, his young face grave beyond his years. By morning, Hank's fever had broken and he drifted in and out of consciousness. The boys had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled together on a pallet near their father's bed. "Who are you?" Hank's raspy voice startled Delia as she wrung out another cloth. "Delia Forrester," she answered, bringing the cloth to his forehead. "The new school teacher. I came to speak with you about your sons attending school, but it seems I've become a nurse instead." Hank's eyes, a startling blue against his pallor, held confusion. "My boys are safe," she assured him, "sleeping just there. They've been very brave." Relief washed over his face, followed quickly by suspicion. "Why would you help us? You don't know me." Delia smiled slightly. "I know enough. I know you're a man who rode 12 miles with a bullet in him to get back to his sons. That tells me something about your character, Mr. Addison." "Hank," he corrected automatically, then winced as pain flared through his shoulder when he tried to sit up. "Lie still," she instructed. "You've lost a lot of blood. Can you tell me what happened?" "Ambush," he muttered. 3 men, didn't see their faces." Delia frowned. "Robbery then?" "Maybe." Hank's expression darkened. "Or maybe Caldwell's getting impatient about my water rights." The following days established a routine. Delia sent one of the ranch hands who'd come to check on Hank into town with a message for Sheriff Taylor about the attack and her extended stay at the Addison ranch. She tended to Hank's wound, cooked meals, and began teaching the twins their letters and numbers. To her surprise, the boys took to learning with enthusiasm. They were bright, quick-minded, and starved for attention and guidance. As for their father, Hank alternated between gratitude for her help and bristling at his own helplessness. "You should go back to town," he told her a week after his injury. He was sitting up now, color returning to his face. "You've done enough. More than enough." Delia looked around the cabin, which she'd managed to clean and organize. The boys were outside, doing their chores after finishing their lessons. "And who will tend your wound? Cook your meals. Continue the boys' education while you recover." "I can manage," he insisted. "Like you were managing before," she challenged. "Mr. Addison, your sons were half-starved when I arrived. This cabin was filthy. And you're in no condition to run a ranch or care for 2 growing boys." Anger flashed in his eyes. "I didn't ask for your pity, Miss Forrester." "Good, because I'm not offering it," she replied firmly. "I'm offering my help, which you clearly need. The school in town won't be ready for another month. I can stay until then, help you get back on your feet, and prepare the boys for proper schooling." Hank stared at her for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "1 month. But I'll pay you for your time." "With what?" she asked gently. "I've seen the account books, Hank. You barely have enough to get through winter." His jaw tightened, pride warring with practicality. "Then we'll work something out." As Hank's strength returned, Delia discovered more about the man beneath the gruff exterior. He was intelligent, well-read despite limited formal education, and fiercely devoted to his sons. Each evening, he listened attentively as the twins proudly demonstrated what they'd learned that day. "You're good with them," he commented one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset after the boys had gone to bed. "They're different since you came, stronger somehow. They just needed someone to see them, Delia replied. To really see them, not just as your sons or Mary's boys, but as Daniel and David, two separate souls with different strengths and needs. Hank nodded slowly. Mary would have done better by them. She always knew what to say, how to comfort them. I feel like I'm fumbling in the dark most days. You're doing the best you can, Delia assured him. That's all anyone can ask. The following day, Sheriff Taylor rode out to the ranch. He confirmed what Hank had suspected: the ambush had likely been orchestrated by Emmett Caldwell. Can't prove it, of course, Taylor said, accepting a cup of coffee from Delia. Caldwell's too smart to leave evidence, but word is he's running out of patience, wants this land before winter. He won't get it, Hank stated flatly. Taylor sighed. Hank, be reasonable. You're recovering from a bullet wound. Winter's coming, and you've got those boys to think about. Caldwell's offering enough for you to start fresh somewhere else. This land is my son's inheritance, Hank replied. I won't sell it for a fraction of its worth to a man who tried to kill me. After Taylor left, promising to keep an eye on Caldwell, Delia found Hank in the barn, his expression thunderous as he aggressively forked hay. You shouldn't be doing that yet, she chided. You'll tear your stitches. I can't just sit around while Caldwell circles like a vulture, he snapped. Delia stepped closer, taking the pitchfork from his hands. No, but you can be smart about it. The sheriff is right about one thing: winter is coming and you're not ready. You think I don't know that? Frustration colored his voice. The herd is too thin, the barn needs repair, and I haven't put up nearly enough hay. But what choice do I have? You have me, Delia said simply. And we have a month to make this ranch ready for winter. Something shifted in Hank's expression: surprise, followed by a cautious hope. Why would you do that? You barely know us. Delia held his gaze steadily. Because I see something worth saving here, not just the land or the ranch, but your family. Those boys deserve a chance, Hank, and so do you. The next week saw a transformation of both the Addison ranch and its inhabitants. Delia split her days between teaching the twins and helping Hank with ranch work. She wrote letters to neighboring ranchers, calling in favors owed to Hank's late wife, resulting in much-needed assistance with repairs and winter preparations. The boys thrived under her attention. Daniel, the leader, began to show a talent for numbers and strategy, while David revealed a gentle way with animals and a poet's soul. Both grew stronger physically as well, their thin faces filling out as Delia ensured they ate properly and regularly. As for Hank, he watched this woman, this stranger who'd stepped into their lives like a whirlwind, with increasing wonder and confusion. She was nothing like Mary, with her quiet grace and gentle manner. Delia was forthright, stubborn, and unafraid to challenge him. Yet there was a tenderness to her that emerged when she taught the boys, or tended to a sick calf, or simply sat with him in companionable silence at day's end. You never told me why you came west, Hank said one evening as they sat by the fire. The boys were asleep, and outside the first snow of the season had begun to fall. A woman with your education could have found a teaching position back east easily enough. Delia was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling on the shirt she was mending. After the war, there wasn't much left for me in Virginia. My father died at Gettysburg, serving as a surgeon. Our home was destroyed. I spent some years teaching in Philadelphia, but it never felt right. She met his gaze. I wanted to go somewhere I could truly make a difference. And you chose Sweetwater. He couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. She smiled. I chose a new beginning, same as you did once, I imagine. Hank nodded, remembering his and Mary's journey west 8 years earlier, full of dreams and ambition. It was different then. The land seemed full of promise. It still is, Delia insisted. This ranch has good bones, Hank. The water rights alone make it valuable. With proper management and a few good seasons, you could make it prosperous again. You sound very sure, he observed. I am. Her confidence was unwavering. My father taught me to see potential where others might see only problems. The snow continued through the night and into the next day, blanketing the ranch in white silence. By evening, it was clear no one would be traveling to or from town for several days. Delia stood at the window, watching the swirling flakes illuminated by the cabin's lamplight. I suppose I'm staying a bit longer than planned, she said when Hank joined her. The boys will be pleased, he replied. They've grown attached to you, and I to them. She turned to face him. They're remarkable children, Hank. You should be proud. I am, he said softly, and grateful. To you, they were fading away after Mary died. I could see it happening, but I didn't know how to stop it. Sometimes we need an outside perspective, Delia offered. Someone who can see possibilities we're too close to recognize. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Hank cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of her presence in the cold cabin. I should check the livestock, he said, stepping back. Delia nodded, a faint color in her cheeks. Of course. The snowstorm lasted 3 days, during which the small family and their unexpected guest were confined to the cabin. They passed the time with lessons for the boys, stories around the fire, and discussions of how to improve the ranch come spring. On the 4th morning, they awoke to clear skies and a transformed landscape. The boys tumbled outside to play in the snow while Hank assessed the property for damage. Not as bad as I feared, he reported when he returned, stamping snow from his boots. Lost one section of fencing on the south pasture, but the cattle are all accounted for. Delia looked up from the bread dough she was kneading. That's good news. When do you think the roads will be clear enough for travel? The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Hank realized with sudden clarity that he didn't want her to leave, not yet, perhaps not ever. A few days, at least, he answered carefully. Why? Are you eager to return to town? Not eager, no. She focused on the dough, not meeting his eyes. But I have responsibilities there. The school will be opening soon. Before Hank could respond, a shout from outside drew their attention. Daniel burst through the door, his face flushed with excitement. Pa, riders coming. Looks like Mr. Caldwell and some men. Hank's expression hardened as he reached for his rifle. Stay inside with your brother and Miss Forrester, he instructed, moving to the window. Sure enough, 5 riders were approaching through the snow, led by Emmett Caldwell himself. The wealthy rancher sat tall in his saddle, impeccably dressed despite the weather, his silver hair visible beneath his hat. What does he want? Delia asked, coming to stand beside Hank. Nothing good, Hank replied grimly. Stay here. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, but pointed downward, a warning, not a threat. Caldwell reined in his horse a respectful distance from the cabin, his men flanking him silently. Addison, Caldwell called in greeting, his voice carrying in the crisp air. Glad to see you survived your accident. Cut the horseshit, Caldwell, Hank replied coldly. We both know it wasn't an accident. Caldwell's expression remained pleasant, though his eyes hardened. Unfortunate business that. Sheriff Taylor mentioned you had suspicions about me. Completely unfounded, I assure you. What do you want? Hank demanded. The same thing I've wanted for 2 years, your water rights. Caldwell gestured to the snow-covered landscape. Look around you, Addison. This harsh country is no place for a widower with young children. My offer still stands more than fair considering the circumstances. Not interested. Hank's grip on the rifle tightened. Caldwell sighed. I had hoped you'd be reasonable. The truth is, I didn't just come to negotiate. I came to warn you. The bank is foreclosing on your loan after the new year. Finch signed the papers yesterday. The news hit Hank like a physical blow. He'd known his finances were precarious, but he'd thought he had more time. You're lying. Am I? Caldwell smiled thinly. Ask Finch yourself when the road's clear. Or better yet, take my offer now and save yourself the humiliation of being forced off your land with nothing. The cabin door opened behind Hank and Delia stepped out, her expression resolute. "Mr. Caldwell," she called. "I believe Mr. Addison has made his position clear." Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Miss Forrester, isn't it? The new schoolteacher. I'm surprised to find you here." "I'm helping Mr. Addison and his sons through a difficult time," she replied evenly. "And I've had the opportunity to review his financial records. While his situation is challenging, it's far from hopeless." Caldwell's smile faltered slightly. "With all due respect, Miss Forrester, what would a schoolteacher know about ranching finances? My father was not only a doctor, but managed considerable agricultural holdings in Virginia before the war," Delia answered. "I kept his books and later helped manage the sale of what remained of our property. I know enough to recognize when someone is being manipulated by unscrupulous bankers and land-hungry neighbors." Hank stared at her in amazement, while Caldwell's pleasant facade slipped further. "The foreclosure is legal," Caldwell insisted. "Finch has every right to call in a loan that isn't yet due," Delia interrupted. "I've seen the original agreement, Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Addison has until April to make his payment. Any attempt to foreclose before then would be illegal and subject to challenge, perhaps even investigation by the territorial authorities into the relationship between you and Mr. Finch." Caldwell's face reddened with anger. "You're making a mistake, both of you. This isn't over." He wheeled his horse around. "Come spring, Addison, you'll wish you'd taken my offer." They watched in silence as Caldwell and his men rode away, their figures gradually disappearing into the white landscape. "Was that true?" Hank asked once they were alone. "About the loan," Delia nodded. "Yes. The agreement gives you until April." Caldwell was bluffing, hoping to frighten you into selling. Hank turned to her, seeing her perhaps for the first time. Not as the schoolteacher he'd once pitied for taking on what he saw as the hopeless task of educating Sweetwater's wild children. Not as the stranger who'd nursed him back to health, but as a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and courage. "Thank you," he said simply. Knowing the words were inadequate, she smiled, snowflakes catching in her auburn hair. "You're welcome. Now shall we go inside? I believe we have some planning to do if we're going to save this ranch." Over the next weeks, as winter settled firmly over the Montana territory, Delia and Hank worked side by side to develop a strategy for the ranch's survival. She taught him better bookkeeping methods, helped draft letters to potential buyers for spring calves, and even reached out to contacts back east who might invest in a western cattle operation. The boys continued to flourish under her guidance. Their reading improved dramatically, and soon they were devouring every book in the small family collection. Their bodies grew stronger too, the hollow-cheeked waifs of autumn transforming into sturdy, rosy-cheeked boys who laughed and played with increasing frequency. "They need to be in school," Delia reminded Hank as Christmas approached. "Regular school with other children." They were sitting at the kitchen table after the boys had gone to bed, reviewing figures by lamplight. Hank looked up from the ledger, his expression thoughtful. "I know," he admitted. "But the town's 12 miles away. In weather like this, they couldn't make the journey daily." "They could board in town during the week," Delia suggested. "Many ranch children do." Hank shook his head firmly. "I won't be separated from my sons." Delia hesitated, then offered quietly, There is another option. You could move closer to town. There's a small property available, the old Miller place. It's only 3 miles from Sweetwater, has good water and enough land for a modest herd. How do you know this? Hank asked, surprised. Sheriff Taylor mentioned it when he visited last week while you were checking the north pasture, she explained. He thought it might be a good solution for your situation. Hank leaned back in his chair, considering. Giving up this land would feel like giving up on Mary's dreams. Our dreams. Dreams can change, Hank, Delia said gently. They need to sometimes when our circumstances change. Mary would want what's best for your sons, their education, their future, their happiness. Their eyes met across the table, the lamp casting a warm glow between them. Something had been growing between them these past weeks, a connection deeper than friendship, a mutual respect and admiration that was slowly blossoming into something more. What about you? Hank asked, his voice low. When school starts, you'll be in town. We'll see less of you. Delia's cheeks colored slightly. Yes, I suppose that's true. I'm not sure the boys would adjust well to that, he continued carefully. They've grown very attached to you. Just the boys? She asked, holding his gaze. Hank took a deep breath. No, not just the boys. The confession hung between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Delia reached across the table, her hand covering his. I've grown attached as well, she admitted. To all of you. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the sunlight turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling sea of white. The boys woke early, their excitement palpable as they opened the modest gifts. Delia had helped prepare new mittens she'd knitted, books she'd ordered from Denver, and carved wooden animals Hank had been secretly working on during long winter evenings. This is the best Christmas ever, Daniel declared, clutching his new book of adventure stories. David nodded in agreement, carefully arranging his wooden horses on the hearth. Can Miss Delia stay for Christmas next year too? The innocent question brought a moment of silence. Hank and Delia exchanged glances, neither quite ready to address what might come next. We'll see, Hank answered diplomatically. Now, who's hungry for Christmas breakfast? The day passed in a blur of good food, games, and laughter. By evening, the boys were exhausted, falling asleep beside the fire as Hank read from their new books. Once they were tucked into bed, Hank and Delia stood on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cold, gazing at the star-filled sky. I have something for you, Hank said, reaching into his pocket. It's not much, but he handed her a small wooden box, clearly handmade. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. It was Mary's, he explained. Her grandmother's before that, I thought. Well, she would have wanted you to have it. For all you've done for our family. Delia opened the locket to find it empty. It's beautiful, Hank, but I can't accept this. It should go to your sons to give to their wives someday. I have other pieces for them, he assured her. This one is meant for you. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Hank, I know it's too soon, he hurried on. I know I should wait, that it's only been months since Mary passed. But life out here is too uncertain, too precious to waste time on what others might think proper. I've come to care for you, Delia, deeply. And if you could see your way to staying, not just as the boys' teacher, but as part of our family. Delia's eyes glistened in the moonlight. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you might consider someday becoming my wife, Hank said, the words both terrifying and freeing. Not now, I know you need time, and so do I, but someday, when you're ready, when we're all ready. She looked down at the locket, then back up at him, a smile slowly spreading across her face. I think I'd like that very much, someday. Hank felt as if a great weight had lifted from his shoulders. He reached out, drawing her closer, and for the first time, kissed her gently, tentatively, a promise of things to come. Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new growth. The Addison ranch had survived the winter, thanks in large part to Delia's guidance and the renewed strength of both Hank and his sons. When the school in Sweetwater officially opened in March, Daniel and David rode in daily on the ponies Hank had traded for with a neighboring rancher. Delia thrived as a teacher, quickly winning the respect of both parents and students. Each evening, she would join the Addisons for dinner, helping with lessons and ranch accounts before returning to her small room behind the schoolhouse. By April, Hank had made his decision. With Delia's help, he negotiated the sale of his ranch to a fair-minded newcomer from Colorado not Caldwell, who fumed at being outmaneuvered. The price was enough to pay off his debts and purchase the smaller property near town, with money left over to build a proper herd. On a warm Saturday in May, with wildflowers carpeting the hills, Hank Addison and Delia Forrester were married in a simple ceremony outside their new home. Daniel and David stood proudly beside their father, their once thin faces now healthy and tanned, their eyes bright with hope for the future. "I never thought I'd find love twice in one lifetime," Hank told his bride as they shared their first dance that evening. "When I first saw you in the general store, I pitied you, this Eastern school teacher who didn't know what she was getting into in a rough place like Sweetwater." Delia laughed, her eyes sparkling. "And now I know better," he replied, drawing her closer. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You brought life back to my sons when they were fading away. You brought hope back to me when I thought all was lost." "We brought each other what we needed," she corrected gently. "That's what love is, isn't it? Seeing each other clearly and offering what's needed, whether it's strength or comfort or simply presence." As the celebration continued around them, Hank looked over at his sons dancing now with the neighboring Walters girls, laughing and strong, and then back at the remarkable woman in his arms. Once, he had pitied her. Now, he stood in awe of her, grateful beyond words for the day she had ridden into their lives and helped his broken family heal. "To new beginnings," he whispered, bending to kiss his bride as the Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and promise.